coffee break with me. Come and take your coffee break with me. Come and take your coffee. Come and take your coffee. Come and take your coffee break with me.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Coffee Break with Candace and David. I'm your co-host, David Marino, and today we are talking with Aden Nepom. She is the host of the Changed podcast. The podcast features a different guest sharing a story from a fork in the road moment in their life. She's also a former Austinite. She is a speaker, executive coach, performer, and social dynamics expert, and the list goes on and on. Aden, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, David. It is a pleasure to be here. And hello, Austin, Texas. Nice to see all of you.
Well, first of all, you used to live in Austin. You're now in Portland, right?
That's right. Yeah, I spent almost a decade living in Austin. And at the time that I was living there, I thought it was my forever home. I was like, I'm definitely never leaving Austin. Austin is the best place on earth. Why would I go anywhere? And then I fell in love with somebody back in Oregon where I grew up, where I said I would never live again. And the rest is history.
Well, hey, you never know what's going to happen in life, right? But Austin misses you. It's changed a lot, as I'm sure you've been kind of keeping up with all the growth.
Absolutely.
But in talking about, where you are today and how you kind of got on that path, I want to go back to your podcast, the Changed podcast. Can you explain to me how that was born and really what it's about?
The Changed podcast was this idea that I held on to for like 3 years before I actually took any action on it. And it stemmed from this moment in time. It was my own little fork in the road moment, actually. I was trying to get my stepdaughter to wear pants. It was cold weather, and I just wanted her to put on a pair of pants. And she was not having it. As I like to say, I totally get it. None of us want to wear pants, but it's a social contract. And this was all before COVID. We couldn't anticipate there would be an entire year where nobody wore pants. But at that time, I was trying to get her to wear pants, and she hadn't had to wear pants because it had been summer weather and she'd been in dresses, and now it's cold, and she just was really struggling with the change. And I said this sentence, "Look, honey, I know change is really hard." And as I said that sentence, I heard it, and I thought, oh no, I think I'm setting her up for failure later on in life. I'm giving her a terrible message to feed herself about change, because the one thing that we do know about change is it's constant. It's absolutely constantly happening to us, through us, around us, for us, against us. It doesn't really matter whether we choose it or it chooses us, but we're constantly faced with change. And if the message we have about that is that it's hard, then we will experience it to be hard. And so I stopped myself in that moment, and I regrouped, and we had a conversation about exactly that. And now she still doesn't like to wear pants, but she gets it a little more. And it's been years. And someday she'll probably come to the conclusion the rest of us have about pants. But what this did for me was it sparked a kernel in my thinking about, well, what do people tell themselves about change? What do we think of when we use this word? It's got this, it's one word that's used in so many different contexts that it's almost as meaningless as it is meaningful, right? I changed my socks, I changed my career. It's like, it's the same word. So I started getting really curious, and I started asking people before I started the podcast, what their thoughts were. If it was easy to pinpoint a moment in time when they felt like they had been changed by an experience that they had. And for some people, accessing those stories was surprisingly easy. And I thought, there's something here. And if I'm curious about this, somebody else will be curious about this. Fast forward, and a podcast was born.
A lot of times out of change, I feel like growth comes. Positive things can come out of that too, but we never think about that.
Or we always think about that. It turns out, in having these conversations with lots of different people, there are 50 episodes of the Changed podcast in which I've spoken with various adults. And now I'm speaking with children with the Changed podcast kids, because I think it's interesting to learn everyone's point of view. But the Changed podcast has shown me that my assumptions about how everyone processes change were just that, they're assumptions. They were wildly hallucinated ideas generalized out from my personal experience, which is a thing we always do. Just it's human nature. I'm doing it right now by saying that it's something we always do and that it's human nature. But the point is that I've had lots of people come on the show, and some people are like, change is awesome. It's super exciting. I love the challenge that life throws our way. What an exciting thing. And other people are like, look, I get that it's constant and I should be more flexible, but I'm not, and I hate it. And I come through every change kicking and screaming and dragging my feet. And then there's, of course, all the different answers in between. And I imagine you as the audience also are thinking about your own relationship with change, just as David, you and I are talking about this. So the idea that it's hard, that's, I think, partially human nature and partially a message that we're taught and that we absorb. I was very lucky to come through a childhood where I was given a great deal of mental resources, communication tools, and flexibility just by having a self-help best-selling author as a dad. And then on top of that, I had improv training, from the time I was in high school, middle school, really. By the time I was in high school, I was like creating art with that training. So, I've been doing improv for a long time, which also gives you all this buoyancy and flexibility. And then my work as a facilitator, all these things have fed me a lot of rich tools that I now help lots of other people develop so that change becomes less painful and more exciting for those who are struggling with it. And for those who already are excited by change, then we get to go to those next level things, which is like, okay, what else do we want to get excited about? What kind of things do you want to be working on? So all of that is to say that I think there are lots of different ways to think about change, lots of different human experiences around it. And it's fascinating because it's also like a universal truth. We all go through changes.
I was watching your TED Talks, and as I told you before the show, that was really inspiring, some of what you had to say about your own personal path.
I was living in Austin, Texas, and I'd been there about 7 years, and I think I was living one of those lives that most people look at from the outside and they go, oh, that person is living a great life. But on the inside, I was not living a great life.
Can you take me back, a few years back to where you weren't at the point in your life where you wanted to be in your fork in the road moment?
Absolutely. Everyone go watch the TED Talk. But I'll preface this story by saying, I think that I'm always in a fork in the road moment. There's always the possibility that something I choose now is going to have a huge impact on my trajectory. But this particular moment was really impactful. This was, I want to say the year was 2012. I actually knew the year when I gave that TED Talk, so you can fact check me with my own words. But that was a period of my life where I was just really floundering and didn't know what I wanted to be doing and didn't know how to utilize my skills well. And I didn't really have a clear handle on what those skills were. And people had given me the advice up until that point in my life. I was constantly fed that message that you should do what you're passionate about. Maybe you've heard that too.
Yes, I have.
And I don't know how you feel about that advice, but I found it mystifying. I was like, what does that even mean? What do we mean by do what you're passionate about? How would I know if I was passionate about something? Maybe I lack passion because there isn't a single thing that I'm doing that I'm like, that, I want to do that. So how do you know what you're passionate about unless you're like, I don't know, like I still don't quite know what that means. And as a result, I had no direction. I was completely directionless. And I was doing lots of exciting things with my life from an outside standpoint. I had fronted a couple of bands in Austin. One of them is called The Platforms, which I think still is alive today. And I had taught improv, and I was performing on stage. I was a cast member at Esther's Follies for the better part of 2011. I got to play Michelle Bachmann on stage, which,
that's funny.
You know, which was a riot and totally bonkers. But I think through all those experiences, you think that like all of that would point me in a particular direction, like, oh, you're supposed to be a performer, or you're supposed to be whatever. And it just wasn't obvious for me. Esther's Follies ended up not being a fit. They were like, you know what, we already have a curly-headed cast member. So I ended up leaving Esther's Follies, and I just really had no clue. My dad, self-help author dad, comes through town, and he's like, you're in your mid-30s. When are you going to get it figured it out? You've got to figure it all out, and you haven't figured it out. I've been waiting for you to figure it out. What's the holdup? What's going on? And as I was telling him what was happening, he just was like, you know what? You make the safe choices, and you got to stop doing that. If you want reward, you have to take risk, and you have yet to do that. And I was mystified once again. Like, what does that mean? Because I think most Austinites would say playing Michelle Bachmann on stage is like a super risky thing to do. Rock climbing, another thing I was into, super risky thing to do.
Well, and even just being in front of a live audience, most people are scared of getting up in front of people. That's a risk for a lot of people.
Right. But he's telling me I'm making the safe choices. And I was like, what are you even talking about? And he said, you're doing things that are safe for you, stuff you feel comfortable with. You know, it turned out I'm going to fast forward through this conversation, but it turned out that what was holding me back was just this complete, and I still struggle with this, a complete and total fear of success. I wasn't afraid of failure. Getting up on stage and being goofy in an improv show, or putting on a wig and singing a song, these things were second nature. They weren't scary. They didn't feel risky. Because the worst case scenario is you forget a line and then you just say something else if it's scripted, or if you're making it up. It's like the audience is incredibly forgiving. So all these things that I was doing were like super low risk, even though they felt risky to the lay person. But something that would have felt really risky would be like, I don't know, going into a Fortune 500 company and helping them communicate more effectively with each other. That felt really risky. Because if I were to go in there and give them a whole bunch of communication tools and techniques and have the training fall flat on its face, nobody gets anything out of it, somebody communicates something poorly and the whole company tanks, that feels pretty high stakes. But I wasn't afraid that I couldn't do it. I knew I could help people. I knew that I had the skill set to help people do all these things. But I didn't have the confidence that I could handle being successful. If I failed, that was going to be okay, because I already knew what failure felt like.
So after that conversation, was it immediate that you started taking action, or did you sort of sit with those thoughts for a while thinking, well, what is the next step? What do I do? Because I think that would be sort of for most people, that would be what they'd sit there and wonder, well, what is a risk? What is a risk for me?
I really didn't know. I didn't know what I was passionate about, and I didn't know what felt risky. So it was a little bit about just digging into what carries the most joy. What do I like doing? What are all of the things that I like doing? What's the through line there? And how do I just do more of what's working? A lot of times people think they have to start from scratch. They have to invent something new. They have to specialize in one thing. And for me, I needed to find the through line. I needed a mission statement for my heart to guide me through things. It turned out, when people talk about do what you're passionate about, that resonates for some people. But for me, I needed to actually identify what I was passionate about. And once I had that, I was able to feed the passion. What I was passionate about was bringing a smile to people's faces, bring a little joy to the equation, having fun. I'm joyful, and in my own experience, and I want other people to have that joyful experience. That was the through line in everything I was doing, was that like feeling of fun, feeling of connection, feeling of joy. And the question wasn't, how do I make $1 million? The question was, how do I do more of that? How do I feed that? So it really did start with baby steps. And I think, as I hear myself saying that, and as I think back on the TED Talk and where I said it there, and how this shows up time and time again in my conversations with people, I think that your audience, like maybe all of you are thinking, well, yeah, duh. Everybody likes to have fun, and everybody likes to experience more joy. And I gotta be honest, I really hope that's true, but I don't know that everybody likes to be the person that's creating that spark for other people. I think some people just want to have fun with their friends, just have fun with their family. I like when people get this little light bulb that just like pops on behind their eyes. Oh my God, that's the good stuff. I could eat that up all day long.
And that sort of leads us to today, where you are now, because you have your coaching that you do. Can you talk about just your business as it is today?
Yeah. So the coolest thing ever, just the absolute coolest thing ever. My dad founded this company called Art of Change. And he founded this company like years and years ago. This was his speaking and coaching business. And in the course of that conversation, that fateful day in 2012, I think, he identified a possible path for me. He was like, you know what? I think that this might be your wheelhouse. And maybe someday we can talk about that. And it was just a little seed he planted. But what happened was, the more I fed this need to see light bulbs happen, the people get excited. What happened was I started like marrying these different aspects of my life that created that experience: improvisation, facilitation work that I was doing, even incorporating music. I do fully improvised musicals, which is such a joy for me. I started incorporating all these things, and I started working with the improv school where I was teaching. I started doing more of the corporate training side of that business. And the next thing you know, we had partnered with my dad's business. And at some point, Shayna Merlin, this is Merlin Works, Shayna was like, I think I'm the middleman between you and your dad. I think you should just work directly together. And so we started doing that. My dad was actually able to retire early. It got to such a point where I had worked with enough clients, I had built up enough credibility, and I had enough skin in the game that he could actually stop doing what he was doing and just like play guitar and watch science fiction. And so Art of Change became my company. And over the last 2 years, I've really I've rebranded the company. There was this logo that was like a man speaking at a podium. And now the logo is a curly headed silhouette of a human being. I took the legacy kind of inspiration there, but I really wanted to sort of step in to that role. So now what I do is I help people spark joy in themselves and in the work that they're doing. One of my favorite, most favorite things to do with people is to have the one-on-one conversation around the thing that they're in a rut around, and help them identify ways that they can move themselves out of the rut and into action. It's like one of my most tastiest, wonderful experiences in terms of reward for me, because I get lit up when I see people have that light bulb go off. So that's one of the things that I do. And I also collaborate with other facilitators and improvisers. I work with a company called On Your Feet Improv for Business, in addition to my own company, and we facilitate experiences together, virtually and in person. And so I don't want to lose the collaborative aspect of the improv stage, which has been such a huge root in my own coming up into myself and my skill set. I don't want to lose that. And so, yeah, there's this idea that you can only work for one company. And I think that's bonkers. Like, why would you limit yourself that way? So I work with On Your Feed. I have my own company. And actually, I still consider myself, and I believe Shayna considers me, because she brings me in to teach from time to time, a faculty member of Merlin Works, even though I'm not even in Texas anymore. So this is just one of these things where it's like this collaborative, just through line of joy and connection gets to be such a huge, huge aspect of my own experience, and then a gift I get to give to others.
One thing that you said in your talk, you said a lot of people live in limbo, which is in between the place of fear and joy, which really resonated to me. Can you expand on that a little and talk about what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to personal development, I usually draw a little picture here, but you can imagine sort of like a trip to a mountaintop. At the bottom of the mountain, there's a little village, and it's called Comfort Town. And it's not necessarily a nice place to live. It's the village equivalent, if you will, of nasty, disgusting sweatpants, but they're your nasty, disgusting sweatpants. They're familiar. So Comfort Town is where a lot of people choose to live for as long as they possibly can, and they call it stability. But what we see at the top of the mountain, that's the peak of discovery. And that's, we all know there's something for us there. We want to head to the peak of discovery. So we head out from Comfort Town and we get into the large area all the way up to the mountaintop of uncomfortable. It's just, that's uncomfortable. We don't know what's happening. It's unfamiliar territory. And what happens for a lot of people is they forget to pack enough snacks or whatever. So they slide back down into Comfort Town. They're like, never mind, the peak of discovery is too far away. I'm just going to do what's comfortable. What I would suggest is that backslide, that's limbo. Comfort Town is comfortable for a little while, but then it becomes discomfort. And you stay there anyway because it's discomfort, and that's limbo. People have a tendency to get stuck in limbo when they are afraid to head to that peak of discomfort just because it gets a little uncomfortable. So that feeling of, I don't know what I'm doing and I might be doing it wrong, that's actually a feeling that says you're moving towards the peak of discovery. You're going to find something great up there. And as long as you're not tipping over into the valley of despair, where like you fall over the cliff's edge into a plunging, horrible death, then you're still on the right track. And here's the thing, it's really hard actually to plunge and plummet like that if you're just in that uncomfortable learning area. But until you leave that comfort town for good, that tends to be limbo for a lot of people. I hope that visual isn't too muddy.
No, I totally get it. And it totally makes sense. I think you're right. A lot of people do live in that space, and it's to live in the comfortable space is easy because you already know what to expect.
My dad used to tell this story. It's the peanut butter story. He used to work with this guy when he worked at the Kirshner and Sons scrap yard, which is in the way back days of my family's history. But he shared an office with this guy, and every day this guy would like thump his way up the stairs. He would like fall into his chair at lunchtime. He'd reach down to the bottom drawer of his desk, pull out a crumpled up looking nasty paper bag, pull out a sandwich, unwrap it, open the bread, look inside and go, ugh, peanut butter again, Rick. My dad's name is Rick. And then he would eat the sandwich. And he did that every day. Peanut butter again, Rick. Ugh, what a day, huh? Peanut butter again. Nom, nom. So finally, my dad says, hey, if you don't like peanut butter, why don't you make yourself a different sandwich? And that guy was like, huh. I think the point of the story, the peanut butter story, is that if all you know is what you don't want, you just keep getting more of it. So he knew he didn't like peanut butter, but he didn't take the time to think of anything else. Every morning he's making himself another peanut butter sandwich. And I think that's limbo. That is what so many of us do. We hate their job, but we keep going to that job. We don't like it when people talk to us, but we don't know how to tell people we'd like them to talk to us differently. We notice that the same pattern keeps showing up in our relationships at work. And if you keep noticing the same pattern showing up, like they always do this, everywhere I go, I'm treated the same way, you're in limbo. And you're in a limbo of your own making. I'll tell you what, though, what happens for a lot of folks is the breaking point is the point at which we think we've made a change. But unless you've actually taken the time to take stock of what's happening so that you don't end up in limbo again, you just end up in limbo over and over again. And the example of this is like you have a relationship that follows a particular pattern, a romantic relationship. And so eventually it comes to that breaking point and you end it. The very next relationship you're in, you're like, oh, here we go again. Well, this is familiar. The same thing happens for people's jobs. I can't tell you how many people I know who have been in a work situation where they felt undervalued, underappreciated, underpaid, to the point where they either got fired, got laid off, or ended up quitting, only to land in a job that undervalued them, underpaid them. It's the same pattern over and over again. So if you want to get out of limbo, it's not enough to put your foot down and say, not today. You have to do the hard brain work that says, not any day.
So what's the next step for you in terms of your business? What do you have on the horizon? Any future plans?
I sat down with my stepdaughter and we just planned out what should be live now, which is the Changed Podcast Kids, which I referred to earlier. I'm so excited about this idea of bringing in my stepdaughter, who inspired this podcast, as the co-host of a kids version of the same show. I cannot tell you how excited I am about that, because, you know, she's only 8.5. So this is going to challenge her in all kinds of ways that are, you know, around like follow through and having stage presence and all of these things that she's going to learn through this process. It's going to challenge me to pull on that improv training in a big way of like having a big offer and then letting go of the outcome, because, you know, working with a kid is different than working with an adult. And the other reason I'm really excited is because kids' voices are so wonderful. Kids see things in a way that we forget. We hit adulthood and we just kind of forget these perspectives. And then we make this terrible mistake of like writing off these perspectives and being like, well, that's just what kids think. But if you remember back to when you were 8.5 years old, when you were 11 years old, you had a lot of things figured out and a lot of confidence in those answers.
If people want more information on your podcast or even just the services that you provide, where can they go to find that?
The easiest way, the portal to all things, is hello.artofchange.com.